Hi guys! Today, as requested, we are doing the dress. So the pattern will be in the description because I don't remember what it is. It's Mccalls something. I go through the buttons. It's got elastic in the back, which makes it easy to get on and off. And if I was going to wear this out, which I will be tomorrow, I will be putting a belt with it just to make it extra cute. And I probably wouldn't wear it with the top button done up, but I put it there just in case I wanted to. But that is super cute. So if you'd like to learn how to make this, please stay tuned. Let's see how we would go recording today because my child is home today, but I have just put on his favorite movie, so he might be right for the whole thing. I'm going to take my skirt back. Now this is my trace and toil piece. I always put them in my tub with the pieces that they are because it just makes it a little bit easier because you kind of need to know which one's the back and which one's the front. So, and then I'm just going to put them underneath and deal with it later. So this is my back. So for my back, I am going to put a pin just randomly in the bottom so that I know that this is the back piece. Because the front and the back look very, very similar. So it's relative, you need to know. We are also going to take our pocket pieces. So you should have cut 4 of those because we're going to have a pocket on each side. If you only want one pocket, only cut 2, or you can skip pockets, although I don't know why anybody would. Pockets are amazing. So I'm going to take, this is my skirt front, so it won't have the pin in it. You can do front or back. It's just so that you know because they do look very, very similar. And so while we're doing all of this, later on you're going to want to know which one's which. So this is my top up here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of my many pocket pieces and then, so this shape has like a bit of a kick here and then the rest of it's perfectly round. So what I want to do is I'm going to measure down 1.5 inches from the top because I don't want my pockets to be right here. I want them down just a little bit. So I'm going to go 1.5 inches and then place this where I need it. Now I'm using Resant thread for those that I'm sure are going to ask. This is the Resant thread. I like it. It's nice. And so then I'm just going to sew this right sides together. And I'm going to stop about 1/2 inch from the edge and I started about 1/2 inch from the edge. This is going to make it easier to sew later, I promise. So I'm going to pull that out. Now I'm going to chain stitch because it's probably a good habit to get into. So I'm going to grab my other piece. Now we don't care at the moment which one's front and which one's back. We're going to deal with that later. So I'm going to take another piece and at the top, I'm going to measure 1.5 inches down. Now you can mark it, you can clip it, you can just measure it and put it. You can just do like a little snip. So long as the snip is within the seam allowance, you'll be fine. So I'm going to take another pocket piece and put it right sides together. And this is chain stitch. So I've just pulled a little bit of a tail, but I'm not going to cut it off because I'm going to find that easier not to. So I'm going to line it up and then off we go again. Now I can trim it off. And I don't have the issue when my thread disappears throughout all of my videos. And we're going to stop about 1/2 inch, the same distance as the other one. So whatever distance you decided to stop, let's do that again.
Mommy!
Yes, Jessie?
Buttonholes growing in moonlight.
Is he?
Yeah.
Very cool.
Coming up.
Okay, I'm coming. I'm back. Not that you've noticed that I was gone. So I've just lined up the next one, and I'm going to sew this one bottom to top, just because I find it easier to have the pocket piece on top when I'm sewing so that I can see it. You can sew top to bottom, but your pocket piece will be underneath. So you might want to mark with a pin where you're going to stop, if that's the way you wish to sew it. Obviously you don't have to. I'm not going to make you. Okay, so that's one pocket on there. So now we're going to take this one and I'm going to lay it down and I'm going to get my ruler and I'm going to measure the same amount I have for all the other ones. Just a little snip. And then I'm going to place the pocket up against here, like so. Now, I'm not going to lie, my pocket cutting was not brilliant. I wasn't very careful when I was cutting it because it's a pocket. And I know that sounds dodgy, but like there's a little bit here, just a little bit that I could cut off, or I could just ignore it because it'll get cut off eventually anyway. So then I'm going to stop there and I'm going to backstitch. So now I can separate all of them, and so now you should have 2 pockets at both ends, like so. So we're going to grab right sides together, and I'm fully aware that the pattern starts with the top, but I'm starting here because I want to. So I've put right sides together, and so now I'm going to match up this top edge and then also my pockets. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew down here, down to the bit where I stopped, so slightly past the end of the pocket, and then go down around the pocket, back to our other stitching, and all the way down the bottom. So I'm essentially sewing this side together and just not sewing the pocket shut. We're going around the pockets to create them. So I'm gonna, oops, I did it again. See, this is why I like chain stitching. I definitely think my tension's off since I pulled my machine apart. In my defense, my husband pulled it apart and I put it back together. So I just assumed I put everything in the right spot. Alright, we're going to backstitch. We're going to come down to, and you want to make sure that this is all matched up. We're going to come down to here. And then we're going to pivot and go across the pocket top. Needle down. And then we're going to go around the pocket. Now, if you're new to sewing, you may want to pin the pocket because on the curve, if you go too fast, it does tend to slip. At least on domestics. I go all right on this one. When I sew pockets on domestics, I chuck a couple of pins in because it shifts on me. I don't know why it does it on domestics and not this one. But anyway, I will sew some clothes on a domestic machine. I promise. So we're going to have the needle down and we're going to pivot and then we're going to go to the bottom. Now, if you've done everything correctly, it should line up at the bottom. So instead of using pins, I'm going to hold the bottom and then not pull on it, but keep it nice and straight. I'm not stretching it at all, but I'm just not letting it get gathered either. And then I'm going to backstitch when I get to the bottom and then trim that off. So that, by doing it that way, we now have a pocket. I know it looks big and gapey at the moment, but that's because we haven't gathered it. Obviously, my waist is not this large. So I'm going to match up this side. Now, again, you want to just pull it taut like this to make sure you haven't twisted anything anywhere. It's better to check and know you're right than not check and have problems. It took me an extra 4 seconds out of my day to make sure that it's not twisted. Stop there, pivot, line up this side, along the top. Now I will be overlocking all of this. So the overlocker will follow the path that I'm currently sewing. Up and under to the stitching, needle down, pivot. Always put the weight of your garment, and I say garment, like today it's dress, tomorrow it'll be jacket, whatever, on your table. Don't have it hanging off the edge of your table, because what you'll find is that it's going to pull away from you, which makes sewing a lot more difficult. This is Swiss lawn dot fabric, so it's actually very, very light and summery, but even then it was pulling because I had it over the edge. Okay, so now I'm going to stop, turn the camera off, because my overlocker or serger is noisy, and I'm going to just come down here across around, and then down. I'm also going to serge or overlock the entire bottom so that I'll be able to turn it up like that. I'm not going to do a roll hem on this one because I want a little bit of a thicker hem. So I'm going to sew both the sides first and then sew around the bottom. So I'll be back. We are all overlocked. And along the bottom. So I'm going to hem it now before it gets gathered because I personally find that easier. So I like to always start at a seam and I'm just going to fold it up. Lots of people like to hem at the end because you want to change the length, which I also understand. So just be conscious if you're thinking about the length and you're not sure if you're going to like it, hem it at the very, very end. But I'm quite okay with the length that I know it's going to be. So we're just going to do it. Now I'm just folding it over and stitching it. But again, if you're new to sewing, grab an iron and iron it down. It's going to make the sewing process much easier if it's not going to move on you. So I'm just doing it bit by bit. And I just use my fingers like pins to hold it in place. I also had to move my back pin up a little bit when I was overlocking because it was just a little bit too close for comfort for me. So I'm just going slowly. I'm now halfway because the seams are at the side. Obviously, that's where we put our pocket. It's going to be weird to have a pocket in the front, I think. So I like to stop with the needle down as well. I didn't quite adjust my overlocker accordingly. Because I have an industrial overlocker, when I use lighter fabrics, I need to adjust the tension, and I didn't. So it's a little bit skewy, like right here. Now mine's a 3-thread overlocker, but the most ones that you buy, like domestic ones, are all 4-thread. Not that there's anything wrong with that, it just looks a little bit different. And you can use 4-thread overlockers as a 3-thread. But obviously I can't add a thread. So I'm stuck with my 3. If I had have thought about it more when I bought my overlocker, I would have waited out for a 4-thread because it makes making like stretchy knitwear clothing a lot easier because you can just overlock it with a 4-thread. Whereas with my 3-thread, I would be inclined to sew and overlock. And I left my snippers at the overlocker. Of course I did. Okay. Trim off those and the tails from the start. Pop them in the bin. It's good to clean as you go. You feel a lot cleaner. All right. So that is now hemmed. And I'm just going to put it aside. I'm not going to do the gathering yet because we don't know what we need to gather it down to. So I'm just going to pop that one. I'm going to fold it neatly and pop it aside. And we're going to go on to our front. So that's our back. So you should have 1 back piece and 2 front pieces. And we're going to do our front pieces. And I have marked the dart. So we're going to do a dart in this. And I'm going to show you how to mark that too. So we're going to go to the wrong side of our fabric. And we're going to take our pattern piece. Now I do this with a erasable pen, so it'll go away. So I'm just going to mark the bottom points like this. And then to get that top point, you can either use a hole punch to punch the hole out, or you can just fold it back like this. And then I do a cross, and it's right on pink, so I'm not going to see that. It's right where the flower is. So I'm going to do a cross. It's only small, and you probably can't see it. It's right there. So I just do little tacks at the bottom and across where I'm trying to finish. Now, if you're new to sewing, I'm going to show you both ways. You're going to want to draw your lines from the center point down, like I did on the pattern piece. And those are what you're trying to match up. So I will show you how to match them up like this. So I'm going to take a pin and I'm going to put it in at one hole and then come out at the other. So we're going to have a pin that looks like this. And we're going to do this all the way down the dart, or the V, or the triangle, or whatever you're going to call it. So eventually it is going to start gathering the fabric because pins are only as long as they are. And then I'm going to grab the point and I'm going to join these bottom two, grab the point and then pull it. And these pins should all then line up, and all you have to do is fold them over and it brings the two sides perfectly together. You can put in some more if you need to. So when I stab this through, it should be pretty much perfectly in line. And then we're going to sew. Now, again, with sewing darts, there's lots of different ways. This is the way I like to do it. I always start from the bottom and work towards the tip. So I'm going to backstitch at the start here. And then I don't want to run over my pins. So I'm going to pull them out as I go. And then when I get to the end, some people backstitch, but professionals pull it out, leave a tail, and then do a double knot. Separate them. So we're just going to do a double knot to tie it off. And that way you don't have bulk at your dart, so it doesn't look weird. So it's probably worth the extra little effort to tie a knot, even if I am struggling. See how it was falling off? It kept pulling it out of my way and wrecked my knot. Twice, in fact. There we go. And then I'm going to chop off the tail. And so now we have one lovely dart. The quicker way to do all of that, which is the way I normally do it, is we're still going to draw our 3 points on here. So 1, 2, and again I'm going to line it perfectly up and then fold it back like this and get my cross. And then I just match up those, grab the tip, and I will just sew that straight line. Now this way is not for everybody, obviously, and for obvious reasons, and I get that. This is how I like to do it. So we're gonna stitch, back stitch, put my finger where the tip is, and then just sew a straight line. Oh, and we're not gonna back stitch, we're gonna knot it, because I knotted the other one. Now I want to take the weight off the stitches, so we're going to put the whole thing on the table. And add a knot. And then another knot. And then another knot. Do as many knots as you feel comfortable. And then trim off the tails there and the tails at the start. Darts. Now we need our next piece. I haven't ironed interfacing onto this yet. So these pieces are piece number 4, which is the front band. So it's gonna go, you're gonna have 2 at the front like this. So what you want to do is you want to iron over 1/4 of an inch on each side, and that's going to hide the raw edge. So we're going to iron that, and then we're going to fold it in half. So you can also just fold it in half, iron that first, and then tuck it under. And it recommends you put, so I will be putting my medium woven interfacing on this. You don't want anything thicker, because then it'll be like really, really stiff. So the interfacing is just going to help for when we put buttons and buttonholes so that it doesn't tear and damage the fabric. So we need to put interfacing on that, and we're also going to put some interfacing on our collar. So I'm going to put some interfacing on my collar band and my actual collar piece. And then we're going to go back to sewing. So I'm going to go and iron all of this, and I'll be right back. All ironed. So we've got tucked under and on. And so now I'm just going to put all the rest of the parts back in the box for in a minute. So the idea is that this is going to stitch onto here. Now, there's a couple of ways you can do this, like always. But I'm inherently lazy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to slot it in and then top stitch. So what they want you to do is to open this up, stitch this, fold it around, and then invisible stitch it. But I don't mind having some stitches along here, so that's what I'm going to do. So we just need to line it up. I am going to pin this so it doesn't shift on me though. And I'm going to put my pins in and then across that way, which I know is usually backwards to what I normally do. But this is going to work. If you put the pins the other way, it won't hold this as well, is what I personally have found. Now, this piece was just like a one size fits all, so it's actually a little bit long, but I am just going to trim off the excess, which is also fine. It's a rectangle, it's not going to damage anything. So I'm just lining it up so it's in there. And as you can see, like, it's got a little bit more stability because of the interfacing, but it's nothing too thick. So it's not going to be like a weird crunchy front bit. It's just a little bit extra. So I'm going to pin both of them and then I can chain stitch. Depending on what fabric you're using, you could actually do this and the collar in a contrast and then do like little cuffs on the sleeves in a contrast color. That would look really cute. With this, I probably wouldn't do it with this fabric actually, but if I was going to, it would be the orange rather than the pink. Because the pink's the obvious choice, and I never pick the obvious choice. I make clothes to be different, so to pick an orange with this would be the different option. Not a bright orange, more like a pale, pastel-y, yellowy orange, I guess. Which I also probably couldn't even find, but that's what I would want if I was going to do contrast. Now again, I'm putting lots of pins because I don't want it to move while I'm stitching. Then I have to unpick it, and I would prefer to have to pin things than unpick things, as I hate unpicking. Not because it shows my flaws or anything like that, because I do plenty of that for you guys. It's just time consuming. Alright, so now I'm going to stitch down, and I'm going to stitch along the bottom, not that that'll matter, and then back up the other side so that I've got some stitching. And I'm going to just make my stitch length a little bit longer so it's pretty. And I forgot to turn my machine back on, that's why nothing's happening. So I'm going to back stitch when I get... And I'm doing, so I back stitch when I got to the actual fabric, and I'm stitching 1/8 of an inch from the edge of this cuff piece. I've made my stitch length a little bit longer to make it prettier, and I'm not stitching over my pins so that it doesn't distort the fabric in any way, shape or form. So now that I'm close to the bottom, I'm just going to stitch across, just because it's quicker to stitch than it would be to back stitch, pull it off, and then come back on. And then when I get in line with the top, I'm going to back stitch, and then I'm going to grab the second one. Now I'm going to stitch bottom to top. I want to stitch the open end first so that the pins aren't distorting anything. That's just my choice. So I'm just pulling them out as I go. You also may want to check to make sure that you're catching that back piece. And then back down the other side. Now I'm going to do all my buttonholes and buttons at the very, very end. So I'm not going to do them now, although you could if you wanted to. But I am going to take my scissors and just cut that so it's even. So cut off the excess, of which there isn't much. There's a little tiny bit there. Most of it's here. Now they are even. And so they will overlap like this. And then your skirt will attach from here once they're overlapped like this. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. That's on. Now we want to attach our back piece, which should be this one. So I've got these right sides together. In fact, it's probably easier, especially if you're new, lay the solid piece down and then put the two pieces on top of it. So you want this piece in the middle. So we're going to line that up along there. And again, if you're new to sewing, you may want to pin this. And we're going to go back to our joining stitch length. And I didn't hold that tail hard enough. Whenever threading, I always just automatically cut a new tail because it's most likely fluffy and so therefore difficult to thread. So every time it does that, I will just chop a new tail on this fabric, thread, not fabric, thread. So we're going to stitch there. I'm going to trim off this now giant tail. I went from nothing to too much. And so then we're going to take our other piece and again put it right sides together so that the shoulder seams match up. And back stitch, because we always back stitch. And then trim this off. Now please note, when I'm off camera, I would probably just chain stitch this whole thing so it's like a big ball of mess, but I don't think that's helpful to beginners, so I'm not doing that. Now I'm going to stitch the side seams because I'm going to need to overlock all of this in a minute. So I don't like to have to get up very often if I can help it. So normally I will just do all of my sewing that I can, then go to the overlocker, and I will have to go back at least once more, but at least I can do a lot less travel time to and from the overlocker. So again, we're going to line this up. Grab your tails. Yeah. So now it's starting to look like a shirt. Now it's still going to be too big, so the idea is that this is currently oversized because it's going to have elastic in it. But it now looks like a mini shirt, which is the aim. Okay, so before I get up and go to the overlocker, I'm going to take my sleeves so that I can do them at the same time. So we're going to, the bell is the top of the shoulder always, so we're going to put them right sides together and sew this little bit here. If you've done longer sleeves, this will be longer, obviously. Oh, that came out of my hand. Back stitch. We're going to do the same to this sleeve. I think I have a chip caught in my throat. Stitch, back stitch. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to overlock here and then I'm going to do the bottom of the sleeve as well. So again, I don't have to go back to the overlocker. So I'm going to do both the sleeves and everywhere we just stitched on here. So every raw edge that you can see, we're going to go and sew that now, or overlock that, serge that. If you don't have a serger, zigzag along the edge. Or if you don't have either of those things, you can use your pinking shears, and it will help deter any fraying. But I would hand wash it if you're going to do pinking shears instead of overlocking. I'll be back. So it's all now overlocked and beautiful, so it's not going to fray. So now let's attach the sleeve. Actually, before we attach the sleeves, I'm going to hem the sleeves. I like to hem stuff when it's not attached. I don't know, it's just my thing. So I'm going to turn the sleeve right way out, and because I've overlocked it, I'm just going to do a single turn. If you don't have an overlocker, you could do a double turn, which is essentially a roll hem, but you just manually do it. If you're going to do a double turn, you may want to iron it. You may want to iron your single turn. It just depends on your sewing level. If you don't think that you can just do this like this, definitely iron it, and then it'll sit where you need. Or you could pin it. You could pin it, then iron it. It's not really a right or wrong way. It's whatever gets you to the end result, really. So I'm going to get back to the start and I'm going to back stitch. And I always start on the seam so that my back stitching will be underneath. Now I trim off those tails so that they're super pretty. This is actually a pretty good thread color match. It just was something that I have in my drawer. I didn't go out of my way to buy the thread color. For the most part, things will match close enough. Some people definitely overstress that the thread color is not 100% perfectly shade matching. A lot of the time, near enough is good enough. Or if you really have nothing that's even close to matching, go something super contrasting so it's like fun to look at. Like if you've got a maroon fabric and it's got some gold looking flowers in it, instead of trying to match the maroon, put a gold on it. Use a gold thread for all your top stitching. Your underneath stitching doesn't matter as much because only you see it. Or if someone's undressing you, I guess they would see it too. Or like stalking your wardrobe, but nobody's going to judge you on what the inside of your dress looks like because nobody ever sees it. Which is why my overlocking thread is cream. I don't have millions and millions of shades of overlocking thread, so it's just cream, and it matches enough. You're not going to see it through the fabric, and that's all I really cared about. Right, collar. So you can attach the sleeves now, or you can do it later. I like to do it later, mainly so they're not in the way. I was going to do them now, but I actually like to do them later. So you're going to need your collar, which is this shape on this particular pattern. Collars come in different shapes and sizes, and this is called the collar band. Now, because I didn't want them crazy thick, I actually only interfaced one of them. And I know some people will think that that's blasphemous, but that's just what I've done. For two reasons. One, I don't want a super thick collar on this. I want it to be a little bit more soft because it is such a light fabric. And two, this is literally the last scrap of interfacing that I have in my house, or had. It is now gone. So anything else I need to make, I'm going to have to go to a shop and buy some because I can't order any at the moment because they're out. But it's just medium woven, which is what I put on the lining of my bags. So what we're going to do is we're going to stitch the bottom of the collar. So we're going to leave the top bit open. So when it's curved like this, we want to stitch this bottom edge. So I'm going to start here. Now this is definitely not a normal shaped collar. I'm not even going to lie. Usually they're a little bit more pointy than this. Not that I'm mad about it. I could have just picked another collar from another pattern, as long as it's my size. That's how these things work. Which is why I love doing what's called Frankensteining, where I'll take different parts of different clothes. So I could take different sleeves. I could make this out of like a softer fabric like rayon, and then put like puffy sleeves on it. Or instead of this collar, I could do the collar that I did on my yellow shirt. Alright, so we're going to trim off the excess in the corners so that we get it nice and pointy. And I'm going to trim it off at that bit as well so it doesn't get bulky when we do the next bit. So now we're going to turn it through. So again, I'm going to put my finger in that corner and then push. And I have lovely sharp nails that helps with this. If they're still not pointy enough even after you've done that, you can get your stiletto and just dig out the corners a little bit if you need to. So now I'm going to top stitch this. Now I'm thinking because of the softness of the fabric, I think it's going to need some ironing. And I've got my big iron on and no ironing board near me, so I can't even do it here. I am going to dig out that corner. See, it's a little bit just chopped off. That's not my end result that I want. So I'm just going to poke that corner out. Gently, of course. We don't want to wreck the fabric. Oh no, that one's fine. Okay. So again, I need to pause it. Hopefully this will be the last time I have to get up. So we're going to iron this. Actually, no, I'm going to have to iron this one as well. I'm going to iron this so it's flat, and then we're going to come back and top stitch it. All iron. So I'm going to hold on to these very, very tightly so I don't have a repeat problem. And I'm going to just top stitch 1/8 of an inch around the edge. Again, if you're new to sewing and 1/8 of an inch just scares you, don't do it. Do 1/4 of an inch. The reason I like top stitching this is because in future it'll be easier to iron once I've washed it. Because as a cotton fabric, it will need ironing. That is the downside to cotton. It looks best when ironed. Right. Top stitching done. So now all I want to do is I'm going to fold it in half and find the center. Like that. And I found my red handled scissors the other day. These were $4 from Bunnings. They're to clip like cuttings. They're in the clippers section. So I'm also taking one of the collar bands, the one that I've interfaced, and I'm going to chop that and find the center as well. So then I'm going to lay it so that these ends will curve down towards me. And then I'm going to attach this to the top edge. Like this. Now I need to do all three, but if you've seen my other videos, you know I don't like to do 3 things at once. I like to do 2 and then I'll come along and add the 3rd in. So I'm just going to work my way along. The reason we pin this and use so many pins is because they are curves and it's easier to pin curves together. So I started in the middle and worked my way out, and now I'm going to do the same in the other direction. And that's because we obviously want the centers to match. Otherwise you'll have a lopsided collar, which I mean could be your aim. You could do that, but it's not my aim. It would definitely be a statement piece though. Okay, so now that that's pinned, I'm going to take the other piece and I'm going to lay it on top to make a collar sandwich. And now that I've got this other piece on top, I'm also going to put a pin at the side here to hold those together. Now, if you wanted to, you could use Wonder Clips. Although I don't want to because of how light the fabric is. I don't think it's going to work in my favor. So I'm going to use the pins. I very rarely use pins, but if I do, it's always on like a collar because I want the collar to look nice. It's right near your face and people are going to notice it. If I made a mistake in the gathering of the skirt, for example, you're less likely to notice it, but you'll notice it right up near your face. So I just use lots of pins and that prevents any problems. Obviously, in a perfect world, you'd want the whole thing beautifully perfect, but sewing is a learning curve. Okay, now that that's pinned, we're going to stitch from here up and around and then down the other side. So we're not doing this bottom edge, but we're going to start at this curvy side and work our way around. Oh, see that? I had hold of it and it still died. It's not my day. And hubby put oil on my knee lift and it's still squeaky. I don't know what we're going to do about that now. There we go. So I'm going to pull the pins out as I go. This is a magnetic pin cushion that was $3 from Spotlight. It's a game changer. Now I'm going slowly so that I don't run over the pins, but I also very rarely have to stop. I get into a rhythm when it's slower. Except then, because this pin got caught. Can't win them all, I guess. Right, back stitch at the end. And so now we have a collar band. See, look at us go. We're going to grab our actual shirt and I'm going to find the center of the back. If you can't already tell from the fold line, just find it again. And so then I can see from here that if I pull that, if even you could fold it like that. And there's the center here. So now I'm going to put right sides together of the collar band up against the shirt. And again, we're going to pin. Lots of pins. Less pins than before though. Now, if you already put your sleeves on, this seam here, which is part of your shoulder seam, whichever way you stitched it, if you've already put your thing in, make sure that this is going to face the same way. So you're either going to have it over that way or over this way, but if you put your sleeve in, that will already dictate the answer to that question. So now I'm going to come to the end here. I've chucked a couple of clips in and I need this to line up perfectly. So I'm going to start here and then work my way back again. And this will just help to get all of that in there nicely. And it's like easing curves. It will fit, but it's easier to go and match up the ends. Otherwise, something just may not be right and you'll have to pull out a bunch of pins to fix it. So I'm going to actually put a clip or a pin through that overlocked seam so it stays in place. And then we're going to do the other side. So I'm going to come to here, put a pin in. You also notice I don't put the pins all the way down like this. And the reason for that is because the ball will get in the way while you're sewing. So if I keep it far away, it's no longer a problem. So then I'm going to come to this end and I'm going to line up the edge of this with that seam and I'm going to pin it in place and then I'm going to work back towards the center. And it does always fit. I've never had an issue where I made one that's way too different. If you're finding that your collar band is too long, at that curvy end, just take it in a little bit more. And vice versa. So if you've done it and it's way too small, unpick it and just do less of a seam on that curve at the start. And that will make it fit every time. Right. So now that that's pinned on, we're going to start at this seam here, which is the collar band. So we're going to start there and we're going to sew to the other one. And that's going to attach it to the outside beautifully for us. Needle down, pin out, backstitch. And then you just want to make sure that all this shirt is not anywhere under the needle. Because I have done that a few times where I accidentally pinch the shirt under this particular stitching. So I will just stop, lift it up, and I swoop my hand under to make sure that nothing's going to get stuck. Now again, if you want to, you can take out your pins. I know a lot of you watching cringe when I sew over pins, but it's a bad habit I have. not the end of the world. So again, I'm going to stop because I can readjust that. It's because we're sewing a curve that you need to move that excess fabric. So I'm going to pull this over so that I can stitch right to the edge of the stitching, like that, and then back stitch. Ha! Nearly fell for it. Take out the rest of the pins. And so now, from the outside, it's looking like a shirt. I don't have any pin tucks in here where I've attached it. It's all beautiful and smooth, but that's something that you check now. If you've accidentally like pinched a bit, you just go and unstitch that area and pull it out and then restitch it. Oh, my child just upended the Lego, I think. Right, so now we've just got this extra bit here. So what I want to do, I want to show you. I'm going to push up the seam that I just did, so it's going to be tucked inside. And then I'm going to pull this down, and I just tuck under the excess so that it all sits smooth and flat. So you can start from wherever. There's no right or wrong. So you want to make sure that this piece is flat. And then we push up that. We're going to pull down this and then just tuck it under. And I'm going to put a pin in and up, and that one went back down. If you want to put a tag saying made with love or your size or anything, you know where the center is because of the notch, so that's where you would sit your tags. You want to put your tag in now if you've got one. I do not. I have run out of fabric tags. And then, so we always want to put the pins up. If you tried putting them in down this way, it actually wouldn't hold and you're going to have issues. Hello, Knuckles. Would you like to go outside? I have to let my dog out. Excuse me. I went ahead and finished pinning. So I just want to show you. So my pins sit fairly far out so that they won't hit my thing, and they're all facing upwards. So now I'm going to start at this bit here, and I'm going to sew all the way along the bottom with the pins, and I do that first to get the pins out of the way so I don't stab myself, and then I'm going to go up and across that top edge as well. So I'm going to sew in a complete lopsided circle, basically. I'm going to end up back where I started. So we're going to stitch and back stitch just a couple. Now I'm stitching 1/8 of an inch from that edge, and I'm going slowly and deliberately, and I'm pulling out my pins as I go. I'm also making sure that nothing's getting caught where it shouldn't. This is the perk of having a magnetic pin board. I can pretty much throw it at them and it catches it, which I really like. So again, pulling the, and I'm also making sure that I'm pushing this as I go to make sure that it doesn't get tucked in anywhere, because that's also what we don't want. And then I'm going to get to that end and I'm going to pivot with my needle down, of course, and then I'm going to stitch along that top edge. Now this one I can do quicker because there's no pins in my way, but you still want to make sure that the shirt is out of the way. And then we're going to come down and back where we started, and then 2 back stitches, and we're not done, but we're done that bit. Yay! So I'm just going to trim off those tails so that they're not messy at all. Look at that, we now have a collar. It's starting to really take shape now. So now we can sew our sleeves in if we want to. So I'm going to take the sleeve right side out like this, and I'm going to place it so that our side seam here matches our underarm seam here. And then I'm going to flick this over so that the shirt will be inside out and on the bottom. Now, if you need to, you should pin this so that they sit together and match. And we also need to be thinking about this top seam. We need to make sure that it's going to sit the same way so that it's nice and smooth and flat. So I'm going to start here. I'm going to pop it under the needle. Now this is actually quite slippery at the moment and it won't sit still. So I'm going to put some pins in. It's not worth me doing that for like a 4th time. Sometimes if it doesn't want to play ball, just put some pins. Then you can let go. Lift up your foot and stick it under. Now, what I find, a lot of people have really tight armholes when they're finished sewing. It's because you don't do a big enough seam allowance. So you need to be conscious of that. So we're going to stitch. I'm going to take the pin out so I don't back stitch over it. Then I'm going to take the other one out because I wasn't up to there yet. Now I'm going to hold this like a 3D object. I talk about this a lot. It is a 3D object, so you need to hold it as such. So I'm going to hold it out like this, so it looks like a big circle, and then we're going to stitch. And if all goes to plan, it should all work out in the end. Another thing to help you with this, if you're not used to doing sleeves, is mark the top center of the sleeve. And then you can make sure that it's going to fit. My child's been listening to a song on repeat and it's officially stuck in my head and I'm trying very, very hard not to hum it out loud. Alright, and then we backstitch. Right. That's not bad. We've got no pin tucks anywhere and that's what we care about the most. So, if you're new to this, which I should have done first and I apologise, we're going to fold it in half at the seam and find the centre and clip it. And that clip will match that top seam. Usually. Always double check, sometimes it doesn't, but that top edge should now match up to the clip that we just did. So I'm going to take this and put right sides together. And I'm going to put the weight of the top on the table. It's not a dress yet, it's still technically a top. You could add a peplum to the bottom of this and make it a top. So I'm going to pin it and then I'm going to flick it so that the top is inside out and I will be stitching with the sleeve on top. This is very important to stitch it this way. You'll struggle otherwise if you try and do it the other way. It won't work for you and you'll get frustrated and have to unpick it, which is not something that we're aiming for. If you need to as well, you can take this clipped part and this top seam and pin it together. So that that has to match to there because that is the center. You can put a clip in it or pin in it like that. And then we just adjust the rest of the fabric within the sleeve. And my husband's home. I ended up just finishing the last sleeve off camera because it went a bit dramatic here. I've also gone and overlocked them or serged them so that now that everything is nice and cohesive to machine washing. Because for the most part, I hate hand washing. So now we have the top half of our dress, which could also be a shirt in the right circumstances. I'm going to now grab the bottom piece that we already made at the start because I worked backwards. So I can pop that down in my tub. You also need your elastic. So pre-stretch your elastic before you cut it to size. My piece for my size required 15.5 inches. So that's what I've got. So now what we're going to do is we're going to put our stitch length as long as it will go on your machine. And we're going to do this in 2 halves. So I'm going to stitch, I'm going to start at a seam. We always like to start at seams. I'm going to start at a seam Turn my machine on might help. I keep turning it off because I keep getting up off camera. And backstitch to lock that in. We don't want that to move, so you can even do a few extra ones if you are concerned. And then we are going to stitch 1/2 to the other seam. So you want to try and get pretty close to the edge because we don't want to go into our seam allowance with this. So I'm stitching 1/8 of an inch from the edge right now. You can go fast if you want to, but I'm really not in a hurry. And because this is such a light fabric, you can see it's already started to gather for me, which is awesome. I don't change my tension. I know a lot of people, when they do gathering, change their tension. I don't. I do change my stitch length to the longest possible, but the way I do gathering requires no change of tension. So now that I'm at this seam here, I'm going to try and show you. I'm going to like be 1 stitch before it, and I'm going to turn, and I'm going to do 1 stitch down. Like that. I'm going to move my pins so I don't knock them. And then with my needle down, I'm going to turn, and I'm going to stitch 1/4 of an inch further in from the stitches I just did. Now, it's very, very important that you don't cross over the stitches. It doesn't matter if you end up swerving in more. I mean, it does, but it's fixable. What's not going to be fixable, and you're going to have to pull it out and start again, is if you stitch over that first row of stitching. So you want to go slower on this side just to make sure you're not going to accidentally do it. I know I discussed this in my top. Apparently I'm doing lots of gathered stuff this month. I don't know. It's just the patterns I've got. Lots of people, you guys have all been asking me, am I doing a jacket? I actually think jacket's going to be next. I bought some lining today for I'm doing a lime green jacket because I'm ridiculous and I think it's awesome. Alright, so I'm back to that first seam. So now we're going to back stitch that in as well. And then pull it out. Now you don't need to leave a tail because we've back stitched it. So there's no hope of it moving, which is what we want. So now we're going to come along to where we did our 1 stitch down. And I always grab my stiletto. And from the bobbin thread side, you're going to pick and pull that 1 stitch down. And now the fabric is going to gather along there. Obviously it's already done a lot of gathering for me, which is awesome, but it will continue to gather. And because it's got the 2 lines of stitching, it makes it a lot sturdier, right? So that's how we're going to do it, but we do still need to do the other side. And remember that pin down the bottom that I said we need to mark our front from our back? This is why, because this piece will attach to the back of the top and the other one to the front. So I'm going to start here and I'm going to do the same thing again. So just off that seam, I'm going to stitch and I'm going to back stitch and then I'm going to stitch 1/8 of an inch from the edge of the fabric, bringing it around as we go. If you're confident in your sewing, you can go faster. I always go slower on the other one though, because I'm very, very paranoid. I am going to stitch over my stitches, which just wrecks it all. Alright. 1 stitch down, pivot with the needle down, obviously. We always pivot with a needle down. It doesn't pivot up, it just moves. And then I'm just going to hold it and stitch near it. But definitely not over the line. I also go slower because the bulk is under the machine, which is glowing currently under my light. It is on low. It's got a high and a low setting. I promise it's on the low setting. It's one of those fancy magnetic LED doodads. Alright, so now that I'm back to the start, I'm going to back stitch. I'm going to pull that out. And I'm going to trim that. And I'm going to make sure I don't snip the other one accidentally because that's important. That's our gathering one from the other side. So now we're going to have to gather it. But we need to know where we're going to gather it to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these bits and I'm going to overlap them. So now I need to think about which side buttons go. So the button holes go on this side. And so the buttons go on this, no, that way. That way? That's the way I'm doing it. So I'm going to overlap them perfectly even at the bottom. And I'm going to go back to a normal stitch length. And I'm going to sew them like that. And that I'm just tacking them within the seam allowance. So that now I know what I'm gathering to and from. It's going to make it much, much easier. So now technically it's closed. So I need to gather the back from here to here. And then the front needs to be that size once I finish gathering. So I need to come and grab this bad boy right here. And I find it easy to put on the stiletto and stick my finger on top so it can't slip off. And it's just like an easier way to hold that tiny bit of thread. You can also just put it over your finger like that and then pull and gather. There's not really a right and a wrong. I just like my stiletto. Okay. So there's my seam. So it might have already gathered as much as I need it to. Now we just need to come back and double check. So this side is our back. So I'm going to come put the pin up here so I can see a bit better what's going on. The one with the pin is the back because that's what I chose to do. You could have put the pin in the front. And then I'm going to take a pin at the side seam and attach it at the side seam. I'm going to use 2 pins and this is going to be my guide to make sure that everything's going to fit. So I'm going to take 2 pins so it holds in place like that. And then I'm just going to bring this over, lining it up to see how much more gathering I need to do because I have a sneaking suspicion that I have to let it out. I do, I have to let it out a little bit. I got a little bit too excited. Excellent. So now I'm going to pin that side as well. And pin, so 2 pins there. And now I can just go along and gather it. Now the easiest way to actually do this is put the skirt inside out. And that way your dress part is on the inside, so it's going to be easier. But this should all fit. You also want to make sure that your gathers are relatively even. So you might just need to fluff them around a little bit so that they look even. You don't want all your gathering like in one spot. You want to spread it as evenly as you can. To save some time, because I'm sure this is a very long video. I wouldn't know because it's in pieces, but I'm just going to add clips. Clips work just as well for this. Because it's gathered, it's thicker, so I'm not worried like I was before that the clips won't help, because they will. See, look at that. Beautiful. More clips. So that's that half done. Now before we continue, I want to do the other half as well. So I want to find my end I'm going to pull on, which I believe is this right here. And I just want to check, before I start pulling, I want to check to see how much we actually need to gather. And the answer is we're good again. So I already basically did all my gathering when I was doing my 2 stitches because I didn't change my tension. So that worked out really well. So another thing here, so we are now up to where the dart is. So the dart will actually sit flat against the seam. So you can just play with that and you'll see that it will sit right where you want it to. I usually point my seams towards the center. See, I've got a lot of gathering here. I just need to spread that out a little bit. So I always turn my darts towards the middle. Some patterns do it the other way. I don't know, it's never failed me so far. Whoops. Now, we're going to need to leave a gap to get our elastic in. Off camera, I do it a different way, which is potentially naughty, but I don't want to confuse you all. We might do that further down the track, or if I make another one of these in a different fabric. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave a little gap on the back side of both sides. So at the side, but at the back half at the side is where I'm going to leave a gap. So this piece is the back because there's my pin. So I just need to leave, not even a big gap, I just need to be able to get my elastic through. So just a little gap. And I'm back to a normal joining stitch length. And I've got the gathers facing down because I find that easier. And I'm going to clean up my pins as I go. And I'm going to take my time to continue moving this so that I don't get any pinches in the top. And the gathers are being pulled through by the feed dogs on the bottom. You might do it a different way for different reasons, but I'm just telling you how I do it my way. So I'm nearly to the pins because I put pins at the side seams. I can tell where an edge is compared to a seam. So I'm just going to stop a little bit before so that I've got my gap so I can pull the elastic. Put my pins away, snips up on the snip stand. And then I'm going to come to this edge piece here, move my needle so I can get it under. Then we're going to stitch and back stitch, and then we're going to stitch the whole way across here. And again, pack up your clips as you go. I just had to lift my foot there because that was my dart and it was going to curl. And I didn't want that. So again, we are back to here. So we're going to back stitch and leave a gap. Now I need to create a channel for my elastic to go through. So my elastic is 1/4 inch. I want to leave just slightly bigger than 1/4 inch. So it's easy to thread through. So again, this is my back. So I'm going to start right here. And I'm going to stitch and back stitch. Now I'm going to do this the whole way around, even on the front, just so that my stitching is even all the way around. Otherwise it'll have like a funny bit here. So we do still need to stitch the whole way around. We're just only going to use half the channel that we're creating. That's all. So you want to continue to flick this around, otherwise it gets a little bit wonky, I guess, is the word I'm after. And you also want to make sure that you're brushing down the excess of the skirt. Okay, so there's the edge. And I'm just going to jump over to here. I'm not even going to cut that off this time. And we're just going to sew the same so that it's even. But I'm not threading anything through here, so it doesn't matter. and then stop, back at the stop. Alright, so now we have our channel. We need to thread our elastic through. Now, because I'm only doing the back half and not the whole way around, I am going to use my loop turner to get my elastic through. This is like a nice little cheat thing I do. So this is the back. So I need to get into the side, and I'm going to go into the channel and thread the channel, hopefully, all the way onto my loop turner, because we're only going halfway and then we pop out again. Right, so to there. So I can get it on my loop turner, and then all I have to do is stab the elastic onto the end. You don't want to do it too close to the end because it'll fray. Like that. And then you should, hopefully, just be able to pull this back through. Now the beginning always gives me grief. It's a thing. Also, my loop turner's broken, which is not helping my cause. There's a little bit that's meant to be on the outside, and I let my child play with it, and it's now on the inside, and I'm not quite sure, oh, there we go, how to fix it. That also could have gone the other way, and I could have broken that dramatically. But we're all good for now. So you just need to stab the elastic on like this, and then the idea is that that will seal the end so it doesn't get caught on stuff. See, look at that! Ha-ha! Oh, I lost it right at the end. That's okay. I can see my end of the elastic. I just also managed to, I opened it too soon, and I have caught the fabric. I know this doesn't look quicker. It usually is. It's probably the curse of I'm recording, so it wants to muck about. So then it says to pull out a little bit extra and then stitch over it. So I'm going to pull out my little bit there, and I'm just going to stitch up and down along a seam line that's already there, so it's not a big deal. It's also within the seam allowance, so that it's not going to be seen anyway, but that's going to hold that elastic. And then we just want to get it out to the same on this end and stitch it down as well. And then we're going to do the same. So I'm just going to stitch it to the fabric. Anywhere is good so that it can't move. And then I just need to stitch the gap up so that there's no gap on the outside of the dress. So we're going to stitch, we're going to go over the seam, and we're going to get to the other side and back stitch. And again over here. So stick it under, stitch, back stitch, over the seam, and back stitch again. So I need to overlock that. But we now have our dress. And I've got a bit of fraying coming through the seam. So I just need to trim all that off. I'm going to overlock that, and then I'm going to set up my other machine, and we're going to do buttons. This is my domestic machine. It is mechanical, so it has no electronics going on, but it does have the one-step buttonhole. So that's why I chose this machine. It is a TY400G, just in case anyone's interested. So I've put the foot in, and then if you've never seen one of these feet before, they're really cool. So what you do is you put the button in the back. So this is adjustable. So whatever size your button is, it goes into this back bit, and then the buttonhole machine part, because it's one step, it will make a perfect size buttonhole for the button you put in. So I'm just going to clip that in. Now, because it's mechanical, most of the time when you do a buttonhole, you have to pull this thing down anyway. And so then I have to push mine back to get my buttonhole to go. So I have already marked my buttonholes. So what I did was I'm going to put one right up the top, and then I've marked 2 inches down for the first one, and then there's 2 3/4 inches between all the rest. So I've got 5 buttons for this. Now, the buttonhole on, I assume everyone's, but especially mine, will go backwards before it goes forwards. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to line my marking up with the red marks that are on the foot. So I'm doing this in detail just in case you've never seen it. So see how there's markings? I'm going to line up my mark right in the middle there. Sorry if that went a little bit blurry just then. So I've got to pick up my foot. So then I'm going to put it in, and I want it to sew backwards first. So I'm going to line up that spot, put my foot down. Now my settings on here are F for the stitch length, because that does buttons. I've got it on a 4 width, and I've got it on a 4 tension, for those that are going to ask that as well. I'm trying to cover all my bases. So now it should just, you put your foot down and off it goes. So I'm not even touching it. See, no hands. Then when I get to the top, you'll notice, because it does back and forwards at the top, and I can just pull that out, and it's stitched a buttonhole. I love this machine. This is why, so I wanted a domestic for lots of reasons. One was for a buttonhole, but also in case anyone wanted to come here and have a sewing lesson, because most people here would want to learn how to like hem clothes and alter stuff. So I got a domestic because I think my heavy industrial machine would just scare too many people. And this one is amazing. So I'm going to put my foot down. I have to click this back because it is mechanical and not an electrical one. And then off we go again. And so I just continue like that the whole way along. Where's my next mark? There. Sometimes I lose it in the pattern. It's a thing. Push that back and off we go again. It's quite cool to watch. Sorry about that, got called away again. So we're just up to the last top one. So I've put it in sideways. And I'm hoping that the thickness of all of this is going to be fine. I don't see there to be an issue, but you just never know. So I am going to help guide this one. Yeah, it's all working out fine. It's always better to be safe than sorry though. Alright. Pop that aside, and by the side I mean on the floor. So now I just need to trim off all of the tails from everywhere. I already did the other ones off camera, so this goes a little bit quicker. Now there's a couple of ways that you can do this to open the buttonholes. Some people put a pin just across from the end and stick their seam ripper in. I no longer even own a seam ripper, so we're not going to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my knife with the blade facing up at the base of the buttonhole, and I'm just going to slowly push it into the center. So the idea is that I've now opened that end. So now I want to come to the other end, and I'm going to do the same thing. So by having the blade pointing towards the center on both directions, I'm less likely to actually wreck my buttonhole. So that's how I open them. I open them with a craft knife. I go slowly. I'm not putting a lot of pressure on this because I don't want to cut myself. And you can even, once you've got it started, get your snips and snip the rest if you wanted to. So you can just use, hello Knuckles. My dog's come to visit. You can just use the start and push it in. So I've only done about half, and then get my snips and cut the rest. But I'm just going to cut it in very small snips so that I don't overcut. And then there's the buttonhole open. And from there, I still haven't overlocked the inside. And so from there, it's just a matter of laying this flat. Once you've done them all, I'm just going to show you how to do this. I've got another video where I show you how to sew on a button, so I'm not going to do that again. But you just want to line it up so that the two placard pieces are directly on top of each other. And then you just take your pen, and because it's erasable, I stick it right in the middle and do like a little cross in the middle of the buttonhole. I haven't done the rest. Like that. And then that shows me when I move this where the buttonholes need to be. And then I can just put the buttons in and we're done. So I will go and do that. So I'm going to show you how I do it. So I make a big loop with a big tail, and I'm going to wrap it through 5 times. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, 5's a really good number. 4 doesn't make a big enough knot, and 6 tends to create like a messy knot. So I personally like 5. You can do whatever you want, but I have tried and tested it, and 5 works best for me. Now my button has 2 holes, so I'm making sure that they go across. So when I hold the button, I want it across the shirt. So I'm making all the buttons the same. So that's like a conscious choice. And then I'm going to go up one side. Oh, see, that is knot is not even big enough. That's annoying. Maybe I missed one. Because all my other knots today have been 5 and they were all fine. It's because I'm recording, right? Because all the other buttons went smoothly. So we're going to go up one side, if I can find the inside of the hole, like that. And then we're going to go down the other side. Now I want to do this 5 times as well, because I don't want my button to fall off. So I've also got the thread doubled over. So it's the equivalent of doing it 10 times. 3. And I'm always trying to stab through a slightly different bit of the fabric so that I'm reinforcing everything everywhere. Why? So my thread is twisted, which is why it's doing that. So I'm just going to try and untwist it to get the last few through. Now I've lost count. Is that 3? 4. I don't want it too thick to look insanely thick, but I want it strong enough that it's not going to fall off. So now to do my knot, I don't know if this is going to work on camera. I'm going to just take like a little bit of fabric, like that. And then I'm going to hold my finger against the needle and I'm going to wrap this around 5 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I did 6 the other day. Turns into a big knot. So now I'm using my nail to hold it close to the fabric so that the knot will be right down against there. And then I can just trim, oh my goodness, off the excess. And we are done. I went and overlocked before because I've tried to record this bit 3 times. I kept dropping the button. So there we go. The dress is now complete. So you should be able to do them up. The buttonholes might be a little bit tight to begin with, but that's just because they've never been used. Just got to give them some time. Like that. Oop. And I went with orange buttons because I had to drive down and actually get some because there was nothing that I had enough of in my stash. So there you go. 1 dress.